You can do that by simply putting your cursor on your screen and muting yourself. And also, and turn the chat screen on, because during the course of the evening, you may have a question you may want to ask, and we'll be monitoring that so that we can kind of include everybody in the session. So hopefully this will be an online dialogue of sorts, and so that's what we're going to do. So let me just briefly introduce our special guest. Dr. Ron Wolfson is truly a visionary leader of American Jewry. He is an inspirational speaker on spirituality, on Jewish life, and he travels the world as a storyteller. And he tells true stories from synagogues and churches and community organizations. Ron is the Fingerhut Professor of Education at American Jewish University, president of the Kripke Institute, and author of a number of books on Jewish living. And I hope that some of those books are in your own personal library, but after tonight, I'm quite sure that you're going to want to include a few, including Hanukkah, Passover, and Shabbat, all family guides to spiritual celebration. The spirituality of welcoming, how to transform your congregation into a sacred community, and relational Judaism, using the power of relationships to transform the Jewish community. And soon, a new book, which is a handbook to go along with relational Judaism. Ron lives in Los Angeles with his wife, Susie, and it should be noted that according to this, you eat frozen yogurt just about every day.
I wish I did now.
I understand you're next door neighbors with our good friend, Rabbi Eddie Feinstein.
I am. He lives exactly across the street from me.
Oh,
and if you remember that old television program, The Sopranos, when Tony Soprano comes down the driveway to get his newspaper in the morning, Rabbi Ed and I do that on Densmore Avenue in Encino and try to figure out the future of the Jewish community and synagogue life. But thank you, Rabbi Siegel, for inviting me. It's always a thrill to be in the Midwest and to see my friends from Anshe Emet.
But we're thrilled to have you, Ron, but I can see you're not in Encino right now. You're in Minnesota, as your sweatshirt, I think, portrays.
Oh, yes. I wore this in your honor. It says Mayo Clinic Transplant Center. We've been here since February 10th in Rochester, Minnesota, at the famous Mayo Clinic. I'm sure a lot of your congregants know it well. My family knows it well too. My bubby, my grandmother, may she rest in peace, had a procedure by one of the doctors, Mayo, in the 1920s.
Oh my gosh.
Her number, her Mayo Clinic number, was in the 400,000s. Mine's in the 3 millions. My wife's in the 5 millions, and now they're up to 12 million. So we came here to get Susie a new kidney. She needed a kidney transplant. And while we have good programs in California, when growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, as I did, when you really needed top flight medical care, you came to Mayo Clinic. So we arrived here on February 10th, complete with our really cool 60s masks. I don't know if you guys can see this. This peace signs and hearts and stuff. This is called a VOG mask. We were told to get these before anybody had heard of COVID-19. Wow. Because as I'm sure you know, when someone gets a kidney transplant, they're severely immunosuppressed. So you have to be very careful about picking up a cold or virus. So way before anybody was aware there was a worldwide pandemic, we were masked here at the clinic. Susie received the transplant on the early morning hours of February 14th. She received a kidney that was shipped from the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida, through Chicago O'Hare. The courier was on an American Airlines flight, which ran into bad weather that day. And while the kidney was harvested, if you will, in Jacksonville at 5 in the morning, it did not arrive in Rochester until well after midnight. It was 18 hours clamp to clamp, is what they say. At 24 hours, I don't know that we would have been able to go through with the surgery. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, Susie had this transplant, and it went well, and everything was fine for 2 days. And then they had to reposition the kidney with a second surgery 48 hours later. And that really set her back. And it's the reason we've been here 3 months and a week at this
As
point.
I understand it, and thank God she's doing okay, and thank God
doing
she's
well.
progressing. But it's also important to note that she received that kidney because you donated a kidney, isn't that right?
I did donate a kidney, my spare kidney, and it was flown from Rochester to Jacksonville. And a 68-year-old woman received the kidney on February 26th. And she wrote to me a few days later, having obviously Googled me on the Google machine, and discovered that I wrote books about Jewish life. And she wrote this wonderful email saying she was thrilled that I wrote books of wisdom. She herself is married to a Southern Baptist minister who went to the seminary with my friend Rick Warren. She must have seen a picture with me with the famous pastor in Orange County, California, Rick Warren. I take my students to Saddleback Church every year. And then at the end of the email, she said, "I feel so blessed to have a Jewish kidney."
Oh my gosh. As our friend Eddie Feinstein has said, maybe on Friday night she's looking for chicken soup for unexpectedly, right? Or maybe just
Exactly.
watch a bagel on Sunday morning, right? From your
She named her kidney Solomon.
Yeah.
In
So
my,
you've been sheltering in place for a long time now, long before we have in Chicago.
Yes, long time.
And we're all sort of spending time alone and trying to kind of understand a new reality. You've been at it a little bit longer than we have. So
yeah,
why don't we start out by having you talk for a moment or two about what you've learned about being alone.
yes, we're staying and sheltering in place at the Hilton Hotel here in a couple of rooms, and we are alone, but we are together. I call it alone together because Rabbi, a day has not passed when we have not received email messages, phone calls, snail mail cards, gifts of food and fruit baskets. I mean, it's been overwhelming. The response from our community. Some of your folks on the call may know of the platform called Caring Bridge, which is a way for people going through a medical or an illness can post reports on what's been going on. Our Caring Bridge site, which you're welcome to watch, it's called the Wolfson Kidney Adventure.
Okay.
And we've had nearly 14,000 visits on this website. And every day we post, we give multiple comments and hearts and all sorts of phone calls. I mean, so I call it alone together. Yeah.
So you can be alone, but not lonely.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, I actually wrote a little piece about this a few weeks ago because it struck me that in the time period I would call BC, before Corona, we would get short messages, you know, how you doing, thinking of you. And then AC, in the AC, after Corona time period, when everybody else started to shelter in place,
right,
we started to get these long messages, long emails, long posts, long phone calls. And it struck me how different it was after everyone was sheltering in place. And what I realized is we had more time. we weren't running around in our busy lives going from here to there. And we literally had more time to write a long message or to pick up the phone and call somebody you haven't talked to in a long time. And it struck me rather remarkably how that little silver lining in this sheltering in place has been impactful in what I think is the most important thing to talk about this evening, which is how you build and sustain relationships even during a pandemic.
People crave, excuse me, people crave relationships in a way. You suddenly, when you don't have it and you can't take it for granted, suddenly you're out there thinking about it. I mean, how many of us had experiences on Pesach? This Passover was different than any other Passover, and yet there we were connecting with people in ways that I don't think any of us ever dreamed we would.
My wife called it a Zeder. I don't think it's new to her.
That's right. Yeah.
Zeder. In our family, we had 60 people from all over the world tuning into the Zeder. And these were people that otherwise would not have been together. Right. What was really interesting about our Seder, I don't know if everybody had the same experience. First of all, it was organized by my daughter's cohort of cousins. She's 44 years old. So it wasn't all, our old timers who were organizing it. They knew the technology. They could set it up. They worked with their own children, my grandchildren and their cousins, to create this wonderful, engaging Zeder, if you will. And we spent the first hour of a 2.5-hour Zoom meeting just checking in with everybody. Everybody got a minute to, check in and say how things were going during the pandemic. And that hour was precious just to keep the relationship going.
Just the power of making time is incredible. But this really leads us right into your work on relational Judaism.
Yeah.
And now you're putting out a handbook as well. And you focus on synagogues doing a better job of connecting people. And I want to look at a quotation with you from your book, if we could put that up. Okay.
Can you see it?
Let me just, here it is, yeah. A new goal. The shape shifting begins with this question. What's the goal? The goal of Jewish education is not self-preservation. It is to engage Jews with Judaism. It's not gaining more members. It's gaining more Jews. It's about people, not programs. It's about deep relationships, not fee-for-service transactions. It is time we turn the paradigm of programming to engage Jews on its head, envisioning a new approach that begins with engaging Jews in a personal relationship with other Jews in Judaism, and then program events for them. Ironically, this was Kaplan's goal all along. Speaking of Mordechai Kaplan.
Right, correct.
As leading, okay. You got to scroll down now. All right, I can scroll, okay. As leading modern Orthodox theologian Rabbi David Hartman so insightfully teaches, Soloveitchik, Heschel, and Berkovitz thought that they could adapt a traditional Judaism to the modern world. Kaplan did not. Kaplan thought there needed to be a total rethinking, a reconstruction of Judaism for the modern world. He had a passion for the mishpacha, family called the Jewish people. For him, religion is meant to serve the Jewish people, and not that the Jewish people should serve the religion. Our new goal is served by putting people before programs. Let's learn who they are before we try to figure out what they want. Let's inspire them to see Judaism as a worldview that can inform the many different levels of relationship in their lives. Let's work toward a rededication of our mishpacha, our people, to a renewed relational Judaism. Listen, Ron, our congregation has benefited mightily from your earlier work in Synagogue 2000. Your ideas on relational Judaism have had a deep impact from the way we greet people to the way that we gauge the success of a program. So your influence and the influence of your thinking is very much a part of the Anshe Emet family. So, you know, you use this wonderful term BC and AC. So what have you learned about relational Judaism in the time of pandemic?
Yeah.
In the BC period.
Well, first of all, Rabbi, I you know, as a teacher and an author, there's no greater compliment than to hear your words, your ideas have had an influence. So thank you for that. And you know, Anshe Emet is known as the synagogue, and it's a great honor to be connected to you in any way.
Thank you so much for saying that. We're
It's
very
true.
proud of this community. But yes.
You should be proud of it. So my major point in relational Judaism is it's all about relationships. You know, we're a covenantal people. The word brit itself means between, covenant, relationship. And my point has been all along that we ought to work on strengthening the relationships of on three tiers, really. The first one being between our leadership, both the lay leadership, the spiritual leadership, our teachers, our clergy, the office staff, everyone who's the face of the congregation to our members, with the people and our guests, the people we are trying to reach, and to strengthen that. So I know, for example, I know now rabbis and cantors who carve out part of their day, very busy days, as I'm sure you do, and my dear friend Alberto does, to connect with our people so they get to know you. You know, the greatest compliment a rabbi can get is, oh, Rabbi Siegel, he's my rabbi. That word my, it indicates a relationship has been built. And the second tier, I think even as important or more important, is that people connect with each other. So you have a group of friends, relationships in the congregation. So there will be people there for you, not just in the good times, but in the trying times, like right now. When you have that connectedness to each other, that's really the core of a great congregational community. You know, a congregation is not a building. I mean,
No.
we have now learned that, right? We can't
That's
go
right.
into our
That's
buildings. A synagogue is not a building. A synagogue is the community of relationships that we've worked hard to build. And the third tier is between all of our people and Jewish life itself. And that we do a good job with. We're good teachers and we're good worshipers. So my call in 2013 in Relational Judaism, and now with the new Relational Judaism Handbook, which is out now, relationaljudaismhandbook.com. There's your commercial from our sponsor. What our point has been to strengthen those tiers. And in the AC period, it's even more important that we understand there's work to be done, even virtually, connecting our people. And I think, you know, when people ask me, how do you build these relationships you're talking about, Ron? I say there are really three ways. The first is to tell your story, to share your story. So in BC, when we could meet face to face, I encouraged congregations to sit with members, particularly new members, over a cup of coffee and hear their story, not sell the synagogue. It's not about selling the synagogue. It's about hearing people's stories and connecting them and listening for their concerns and their talents and their passions and the things we can invite them to connect with us in our work in the congregation.
You know, it's interesting. When we do that, so often people say, oh, come on, Rabbi, that's not interesting. And then when they tell you their story, it is the most fascinating. Naomi does a fabulous job in our morning minyan, and people come and they have yard site, and we ask people if they're open to talking about their loved ones. And we have heard some of these extraordinary stories that are inspirational. And what happens in those moments is that the minyan becomes truly a community in the best sense of the word. So that can't be, but people feeling comfortable telling their stories and sharing their stories is remarkable.
It is. It's really important. Even within our programs, when God willing we'll be back together physically, whenever I would do a talk now, I build in what I call a relational moment. The churches do something called pass the peace, turn to someone and say good morning, or, that kind of thing. And it takes 10 seconds. And some synagogues will do that. Turn to each other and say Shabbat Shalom. The issue is that often you're saying Shabbat Shalom to the people you already say Shabbat Shalom with, because you're sitting together with your friends.
Right.
So my relational moment, I would always ask people to go meet someone in the congregation you don't know and spend a few minutes talking about a question I might pose, or some way for people to connect with folks they don't know, and to help build that relational tissue in the congregation. The second thing we can do to build relationships is to share experiences together. So anybody that's taken a mission to Israel with you, Rabbi, or,
Sure.
there's no substitute for that. It's like with our kids, there's no substitute for camp when you're living Judaism. So sharing experiences, boy, are we sharing an experience now?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we'll be talking about this for years. And so sharing that experience is really important as well. And the third way we build relationships is by learning from those experiences. I'm a Jewish educator. We call it experiential education. So taking from the experience the lessons we can use in our lives. And when we do those three things, telling our stories, sharing experiences, and learning from those experiences, we deepen relationship with each other.
But yet we're living in a moment, and I'm watching the chat, and Merle Gross's last notation was, "I'm touched and amazed at the level of intimacy that is possible via Zoom."
Yes.
Which is really, it's true, and yet in a world where handshakes and hugs are no longer accessible, we wouldn't welcome them anymore, where the people wearing masks are the ones that we don't suspect, right? What are the strategies for congregations going forward in this AC period? And again, Merle made a different comment, which I do want to underscore. We are actually in DC. This is during Corona. We're not there yet, but and I think that's an important correction. But we are really struggling right now, I think, as all communities are, trying to figure it out. And so what's your advice and counsel for us, right? And you've been in a hospital setting, so where, doctors are wearing masks, and so that doctor-patient relationship is really damaged, or it's skewed. So maybe you've learned some strategies just being in a place like Mayo Clinic, which is such a forward-minded thinking hospital.
So at the Mayo Clinic, when you come into an exam room, they take your blood pressure and they go over a little history, and then the doctor comes in. And first of all, the doctor always knocks on the door. It's always interesting. And you say, come in, and the doctor would come in BC and shake your hand. And now, as we got into the pandemic, they would do the same thing, but the shaking of hands stopped. And then a few weeks ago now, they started wearing these masks. Everybody is wearing a mask, except for a certain government official who visited here a while ago. Now the doctors, here's what's so interesting. The doctors, while not physically connecting, and you can't see their smiles, you can see their smiles. You can't see the bottom of their faces, but you can see their eyes. And their eyes tell the story. If they're concerned, the brow furrows, and you can see that they're concerned. And if they're very happy at the progress, like our last visit yesterday with the doctors. Susie's doing so well. You could see their smiles in their eyes. So I think that we're going to have to learn new ways of communicating. Someone asked me recently, what are we going to do about handshaking? You know, I'm kind of infamously known whenever I'm a scholar in residence or giving a lecture, I stand at the door and greet everybody as they come in with a handshake and a hi, I'm Ron. So Ron, what are you going to do now? So I've already thought of some ways to say hi. So there's waving. I heard one where if you see somebody, you clap, and then the other person claps twice. Hand over heart. There's the old namaste. I'm sure we're going to invent a variety of ways to greet each other, even though we're not going to be kissing and hugging like we did before.
You know, speaking of masks, you wrote a great piece on masks that we were making available. But why don't you share a little bit about that? Because I just thought it was so on target and so well said, but it should be repeated.
Thank you. You know, it occurred to me the other day when the controversy started to emerge about masks as cultural touchstones in the culture wars.
Yeah.
You know, that people who think this whole thing is a hoax are proudly walking around without masks. And the people who are desperately concerned about either infecting someone or being infected are wearing the masks. And I start this piece with yarmulkes. Yarmulke always seemed to me to be a very funny word when I first heard about it as a kid in Hebrew school in Omaha. Not as funny as phylacteries. See, phylacteries I thought had something to do with birth control. and I was 10 years old. I didn't know how to get into birth control.
If you wear them to bed, I think they'd be an effective form of birth control.
Right. So, you know, yarmulkes are really interesting because kippot, of course, we'd call them now in the Hebrew. You know, you have these kippot that have sports logos on them, you know, the Bears or, I don't know, the White Sox. Or you've got the kippot with people's names on it, or you've got kippot with, on the inside, they're stamped with the date of the bar bat mitzvah or the wedding. So, you know, yarmulkes became sort of personalized. And I wondered if the same thing's going to happen with masks. And I'm beginning to see it already. You know, I've seen people with all kinds of personalization of these masks. And I end the piece by advocating for the importance of wearing a mask, because if you're immunosuppressed like my wife Susie is, I'm literally frightened of being around people who are not wearing a mask, because if it should somehow get to me and somehow got to Susie, it would be devastating. And I'm reminded, just for everyone listening in, because I think I put the YouTube link in the article, I hope so. I was reminded of an old public service announcement that some of our listeners might remember. It was Gig Young, the actor, interviewing James Dean. He was on the set of Giant. He was wearing a cowboy outfit. And the highway system had developed. This was 1955. The interstate highway system had developed. And you might remember the slogan, "The life you save may be your own."
Right.
And Dean says at the end of the commercial, he says, you know, the life you save might be mine. Right. And it might be mine, or it might be Susie's, or it might be a friend or a loved one. So wear a mask, please.
You know, in a sense, a mask is also, it's becoming a symbol of how you understand community. Am I part of a community, or am I separating myself from community? And it's become a very interesting symbol, and I think a very divisive one as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Rabbi. The other thing I would just say to everybody, who are wondering what are we going to do going forward for synagogues, just a word about what we wrote in the Relational Judaism Handbook. What we found is that congregations that are using small groups as a way to connect people and help them build relationships, both with each other, with the staff and clergy, and with Jewish life, have been very effective, particularly in a synagogue of your size. So my two co-authors are both rabbis in major synagogues, Nicole Auerbach at Central Synagogue in New York and Lydia Medwin at the Temple in Atlanta. And they are the small groups rabbis in these large communities.
So that is actually in their portfolio.
That's their job, their main job. They do other things, but they were hired as engagement rabbis and to do what we call a relational engagement campaign. And what they've discovered is there are four ways to develop small groups, just to list them briefly. First, there's demography. What stage of life are you in? Second is affinity. What kind of passion or talent do you have that you can connect with? Third area is geography. Who lives near each other in neighborhoods? And the fourth is availability. When are people available? So going backwards, so many of our congregants are available right now because we're not going anywhere. So this is, and I'm sure you've seen it in Anshe Emet, the attendance at these worship services, at the Shiva Minyanim, at the funerals has been outstanding. I hope attendance keeps up when we get back together physically. Geography, when we do start to come together again physically, it's going to be in groups of 10 or maybe as many as 50 down the road in phase 3 or 4. And groups of 10, well, if I were in leadership in a synagogue, I'd be thinking about how to get small groups together geographically in Chicagoland. Affinity, there's so many Zoom meetings going on. And here's an interesting tip. Some of the most popular Zoom meetings now are those that add senses. So for example, the Seder, everybody was in their own home, but we could eat our own charoset, or we could smell that delicious Manischewitz wine. The cooking Zoom conferences are very, very popular because people are making recipes in their own homes, but they're smelling and they're tasting, and it adds a layer of experience to this two-dimensional experience.
Many of these things, are happening at Anshe Emet, and I'm watching Amy up there. She's our engagement director, or director of engagement, and that says a lot. But I love this idea of, it's very forward-minded to have rabbis who are really assigned to that. That's a very powerful idea. So thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yes, it does feel, in a sense, that, or at least I think, that we are in a kind of Yochanan ben Zakkai moment. Yochanan ben Zakkai was the rabbi who created the yeshiva in Yavne and was carried out of Jerusalem in a coffin and all the rest, and was forward-minded enough to plan for the future. But he was also very bold in his halachic pronouncements. And that, I think, is one of the challenges of the moment. And because I think it calls for bold leadership. We are looking at halachic issues in a way that we haven't looked at them before. And in some ways, the coronavirus has kind of fast-tracked issues that were on the horizon. I think we knew that we were going to be dealing with streaming and how we were going to use technology, but now it's here, it's waiting. And in a way, synagogues are sort of in that dot-com moment when when shifts took place almost overnight. And I think that's going to be the challenge of the moment. And I know, at Anshe Emet, which has a long history of having creative rabbis making bold decisions, that we are in that process as well. Whether it comes to how we participate in a minyan, how we read Torah, how we're going to have B'nai Mitzvah.
Yeah.
You know, we are doing it in real time. And I think that's one of the, in the conservative movement, kind of finding the balance is a challenge, but I think it's a welcome challenge, because I think we see what's working, what's not working, and people are very open in a way that I don't know that they have been open in the past few years, let's say.
Well, you know, the thinking about Yochanan ben Zakkai is a wonderful idea, Rabbi, because as we know, without his forward-looking thinking about what to do after the destruction of the temple, we might not have Judaism itself.
Exactly right.
He transformed what was the temple-based sacrificial system of worship into the home-based mikdash ma'at, creating the home as the tiny sanctuary, the substitute sanctuary, and Yavna and the study hall to be the place of transmission of Jewish thought and ideas, and the home to be the place for Jewish living and Jewish celebration primarily, along with the synagogue later on. It had to be done in a nanosecond.
That's right. That's right. Because
of the destruction of the temple. And that's exactly what happened with this pandemic.
I think,
as an educator, for years we've been advocating the uses of technology in Jewish education. And frankly, our teachers and rabbis and cantors were often a little hesitant to do this.
I can't imagine rabbis being hesitant.
No, but, you know, we're not fluent in the technology, and there are questions about if you live stream services, would anybody come to the actual synagogue sanctuary? And this pandemic has forced us into enormous change overnight. And okay. I'm so impressed, as I'm sure you are, but I can tell you as an observer, with many colleagues all over the country, all over the world, the rapidity, the quick response of synagogues to this by putting everything online is rather extraordinary. And kol hakavod to you and your colleagues for doing that. And I hope that in the future, we'll find ways to use the technology, even though I'm desperate for the time we're going to be together again.
I appreciate your words, but you know, in thinking about Yochanan ben Zakkai, I'm thinking that in his time, people could not imagine worshiping Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur outside of the Beit HaMikdash,
yes,
so the Korbanot. And this year, we are imagining a high holiday period where we likely will not be in the synagogue, or not be in the synagogue in meaningful numbers. And thinking about what that's going to look like and how we are going to appeal to the congregation is, on the one hand, an awesome responsibility, but it's also a remarkable opportunity to experiment and to see how to engage people both in our, you know, within the wall, in the communal walls, if you will, not the building, but beyond. And,
yes,
you know, all of the, you know, nuns out there, those who don't put down Judaism as a religion when they write nun, I think that there is an opening here as well, because I think all of us have been destabilized in some way. This is that moment when religion sort of becomes important. It speaks to our soul, and
yes,
I think, you know, and all of us have been humbled by this as well, which is
yes.
the foundation.
Well, I just reflect on an experience I had about 7 or 8 years ago. I fell very ill on Yom Kippur that year, and I could not go to shul. it's not my practice to watch live streams of services, certainly not on Yom Kippur, but I knew our friend Rabbi Naomi Levy at her community called Nashuva was doing a live stream of Kol Nidre. Mm-hmm. So I had no choice in my mind, so I watched it. Well, guess what? There were 75,000 other people watching it. And the point I'm going to make is your point. You, I think, have the opportunity with your phenomenal leadership, Rabbi, and the greatest chazan in the world, mm-hmm. To present a high holiday experience to thousands of people, not just your congregants, but to thousands of people potentially around the world. Now, is that what we're in business for? Not exactly, but it's certainly an opportunity to reach those non-Jews, mm-hmm. those unaffiliated Jews, and try to encourage them. And when the time comes, they look to Anshe Emet as a place for spiritual renewal.
There's no question. There's no question. And how many different, in a sense, we're thinking about the high holidays almost as if Anshe Emet were a cable network, right? You know, with all kinds of different offerings, including what happens in the building. And, you know, we are a congregation that celebrates pluralism. So yes. There are, you know, there are minions in our synagogue that are very traditional, and there are minions in our synagogue that are less traditional, more liberal. And, you know, the one thing that we have been very machmir about is having one kiddush.
Yes, that's great.
And so it doesn't matter where you daven, we all right. come together and everyone sits in the same room. And I have to tell you that that is missed by so many different people, including myself. Just to walk into the room and see hundreds and hundreds of people in that room and just connect, we're losing that. But how will we go forward? We're talking about having shofar blowers going into different intersections.
That'd be great.
You know, and it's there, and so the opening to different ideas and creative ideas and communal moments, I think is very rich and very real. But I yes. want to come back to this relational issue, because I remember the importance of chavurot, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know about the rest of the country, but in many ways they went by the wayside, right, over a period of time. And in a way, I think what you're talking about is a revival of that idea.
With a difference. Yeah. And it's a big, important difference, because I saw one of the comments. Chavurot often did become cliques. And when the social chemistry was good in the chavurah, they often lasted 30, 40, 50 years. You know, mm-hmm. The rabbi I admired so much at Valley Bas Shalom when I first joined, Rabbi Harold Shoeis, may he rest in peace.
Remarkable.
Brought the idea of chavurah to the congregation, and some of those chavurot are still meeting 50 years later. But if the social chemistry was not right, they fell apart. Hmm. The difference in small groups, in a small group effort, is there are on-ramps and off-ramps. It's not once and forever, as a chavurah was kind of designed to be. So you can join a small group and leave the small group if it doesn't suit your needs. Hmm. And there's always, always, always something that I remember from my youth in Omaha at Passover. No matter how many people we had at the Seder table, my bubby, may she rest in peace, and my mother, may she rest in peace, when she took it over, always sat an empty chair for Elijah. It wasn't just a cup of Elijah. There was actually a chair sat for Elijah to show up at the Seder table. That's a wonderful metaphor for the difference between a small group and a clique. A clique is closed. A small group is open. Anybody can come and join. And that's the difference. And we outline this in great detail in the handbook.
Well, It's a beautiful, and it must have really spoken to you this past Passover when there were so many empty seats, and what a powerful idea. You know, I'm thinking as we're talking about the high holidays that this year, ramping up to the holidays, the leading up to the holidays, is as important as almost as important as the holidays themselves.
Agreed.
How we bring people together in small groups to connect, to see each other, to invite people. We're planning a whole variety of things to bring people into the synagogue, whether we give people a blessing or not, but just to connect in person in small groups, I think would be so vitally important, right? And so much of the planning, you know, is for every year is for the high holidays themselves, and we do a few programs leading up to them that are always fine and thoughtful and well attended. But this year it's different. You know, everything is different, and everything matters in a way that this is a very, very important year for all of us. I'm just looking at one comment. What would be the cost to daven in our own living rooms this Yom Kippur? It's very unlikely that we'll be going to places filled with people, even people we love and trust. Many of us, of course, will continue our financial support as long as possible. Will that be enough? I think that's the question. You know, and part of it is what have we done to prepare people for the holiday? If we're just depending on, you know, the quality of the chazan's voice or the thoughtfulness of a rabbi's sermon or the liturgy itself, it's not going to be enough. I don't think. I think we have to do more. I think you know, that empty chair is very real. You know,
Yes,
for all of
I
us.
think your point about Elul is well taken.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things I learned from my friend Rick Warren, the mega pastor, you know, he wrote this book that's the most published book next to the Bible in the English language called The Purpose-Driven Life. And that book he wrote as a guide for a 40-day campaign of finding your purpose for his congregants.
Mm-hmm.
And every day was another little chapter to read. So in the month of Elul, imagine if we had small groups of people meeting 10 at a time, perhaps, maybe by geography or demography, around a text or around some sort of spiritual preparation for the holiday, so that people felt connected in a different way, even if we can't meet in huge numbers on the holiday itself. I trust that you and your team will be very creative in thinking this through and find ways to do it.
I'll tell you, just, you know, every Shabbos, the Chazan and I go into an empty sanctuary.
Yeah.
One of the strangest experiences to stand in a room and just look at empty seats. But at the same time, you know, you stand and imagine who's on the other side of that camera. And, you know, people turn out, it's just, it's remarkable what and how we've transformed ourselves. I have one last question. And
Sure.
this is I'm sad because I just think you have so much to say, and you are such a remarkable figure. And we're so grateful that you've taken the time at such a challenging time. But you gave a kidney.
I did.
And, you know, how is the experience of a kidney donation? How has it affected you? And I want to build on that and ask you about your spiritual life during this time.
Yeah.
And what speaks to you differently in the Siddur, in Jewish tradition? So if you could talk about that, I think we'd all be enriched by it.
Well, thank you. It's interesting. We've been surrounded by medical people now for 3 months and a week. And these are the top doctors and nurses and counselors and technicians. They're scientists. They're medical professionals. Mm-hmm. And yet, when you walk into the kidney transplant center, it feels like you're walking into a sanctuary. It feels like a very spiritual place. Mm-hmm. despite all the technology and despite all the tests and despite everything else, which thank God they have, but the experience of Susie receiving a kidney, which God willing will be giving her many, many years of good health, and the experience of donating a kidney anonymously has been among the most powerful spiritual experiences I've ever had.
Mm.
First of all, there's not too many things you can donate while you're alive to help the health of another human being, even someone you don't know. I mean, you can give blood, and you can give maybe stem cells or bone marrow, or there's not much that you can donate that can improve another person's life. The woman I mentioned at the beginning of our talk had a 3% chance of finding a match for her kidney function, her antibodies. And I happened to be in that 3%. And we happened to be at the Mayo Clinic at the right time so she could get my kidney, and it's changed her life. I can't imagine much more of an experience that would deepen my sense of spirituality and connectedness to not just other human beings, but to God. Because, you know, I wrote a book called God's To-Do List a number of years ago. And my point in that book was, don't look for God in heaven. Look for God right here in relationship. God is right here between us. You know, we read about the Cherubim last week, and they had to face each other. The Cherubim faced each other. And when you face each other, when you're in relationship, that's where I find God. So my hope for your wonderful congregation is that now in DC and certainly in AC, we'll find the strength to build those relationships even deeper as we forge into what I know will be a bright future. Well, thank you for inviting me, Rabbi.
And thank you so very much. I want to do two things in closing. I've been paying attention to the chat, and I want to just acknowledge that if all goes well, we'll have the possibility of having 50 people in each service. So I want people to know that we are aware of that, and we are making a whole variety of different decisions, both for those who, and creating opportunities for those who want to be in the synagogue, and to those who want to be part of the congregation online. We're working on that, and we're thinking about that. And if you have ideas or suggestions, please, please, please keep us in mind, and don't hesitate to write. And I want to just also mention that our goal at the end of the day isn't a consumeristic goal. It's not a business plan per se. It's a community plan, right? How do we come through this and engage community differently? How do we appreciate community in a way that we might not have, because the coronavirus has given us all new lenses to look through? That's the real challenge, I think, of this Yochanan ben Zakkai moment. And it's exciting, it's exhausting, but it is remarkable when we have opportunities to visit with people like you, because you remind us of, in this wonderfully optimistic way that you have, of what we have to look forward to. So I'd like to end by asking Naomi Weiss to lead us in a Misha Berach as we think of not only Susie and we pray for her tonight, but also that we think about all those who are struggling with illness and coronavirus.
I can get it to fit on the screen. Oh.
Yep, you're on.
Yep. Refa'enu Adonai v'nei Rafa'enu, Hoshi'enu v'nivashea, El karov l'chol karov, ach karov l'irei v'yishol. We pray for healing of the body. We pray for healing of the soul, for strength of flesh and mind and spirit. We pray to once again be whole. Elorifana, oh please heal us now. Refuat ha-nefesh, or refuat ha-guf, refuah shelema. Heal us now.
Beautiful.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for joining us. And it was great to speak to you, Ron. Thank you again.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you
so much. Everybody, please note that his articles are in the top part of the chat room, or if you want me to send them to you privately, I'm happy to do so.
Bye. Thanks, Amy.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Amy.
You're
Great
right.
job.
Thank you, Ron.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you, Ron.
Good to see you all.
You as well.
It's a pleasure.
Sure was.
Can't wait to have you in person at the show.
Yeah.
Anytime. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Very special.
Bye from the cameras.
Cameron.
Hi, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Sayonara.
The sign off.
Bye.
I'm going to stop recording, Mimi.
Bye, Merle. Sending our love to you.